we're back. Welcome to Abstractable. This is a podcast for the entrepreneurial spirited, the curious, the hungry, and those that just want to do a little bit more. We distill down the ideas of the world's best thinkers in business, startups, psychology, and today we are talking about art. Today's episode is about the Documentary Manufacturing Intellect by Jeff Koons.
Yeah, cool. Well, we talk about the postmodern art of Jeff Koons and its controversial reputation. We also discuss, whether you actually need to create the work with your own hands for it to be your art. And we also talk about the effect that popularity and the commerce of art has on its efficacy. And why? Because learning about art, it can open up a whole new world of understanding about the world around you. So don't forget you can find full video from episodes on YouTube and check out show notes and other information at our website, abstractable.co. And lastly, if you enjoyed the episode, we'd love it if you shared it with someone. We hope you enjoy.
Let me tell you a story, mate. When I this was going back, I'm trying to think how many years ago. I'm thinking about 5-6 years ago. I was in desperate need of some new sneakers. The last pair of sneakers that I had was from when I was in high school, and I just kept using the same pair of sneakers just because, they were still alive. They were still doing their thing. Although the grip, and so it got to the point that the grip was just non-existent. And these were the sneakers that have that, like, they aren't like the sneakers you see today where they've got like this bit of foam just sitting on the bottom that's like exposed to the ground. They had like that proper thick bit of like rubber underneath,
right.
That used to form up the bottom of the sneaker. So I needed to go get a new pair of sneakers, and I walked into this store. It was in Melbourne somewhere. I can't remember. There was one of those like fancy sneaker stores seemingly, and went in there just because I wanted a new set of runners. And I ended up buying these pair of runners. I was like, yeah, I'll wear them, on the way out because I had some other shitty pair of shoes on. And then when I walked out, there was like 2 or 3 people said to me, like in the street, that day, they're like, "Oh, you've got the new," and I was like, "What? What do you mean? These are just some sneakers I bought. Who are you? Why?
So you were just unconsciously fashionable. It just came that naturally.
No, but mate, I just went in there to buy some sneakers, like, and now, exactly as you say, you go to like a sneaker store. And it's like you've walked into like, I don't know, like an Apple store or something, It's
different.
I don't know. I think it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm curious about this, right? Yeah. I wonder, did this start with Jordan?
Well, that's what I seem to feel like it did, or at least around that time, that they became very much a fashion statement. And then,
but fashion statement's different from art.
That's right. So there seems to be. There's difference between a collectible and art. There's a difference between fashion and art, probably, but they're much closer. Some fashion can be artistic, I guess, but it seems different if it's art, because I feel like there's a couple of things that have to happen. Like a computer game, you probably wouldn't say is art. And I think it might have some, they're probably more collectible if you got an old Nintendo or something. And maybe that's got to do with scarcity a little bit, but also design. I think if it's art, it's got to be like wanted at the time and seen as like artistic kind of when you're buying it. Otherwise, it's probably just a collectible. So like I walked it in around And yeah, it's sort of like got to do, I think, a little bit with how many are available at the time. So Like I went to Melbourne Central, and this was pre-COVID, and there were people lined up around the block ready to like stay all night at this place, and they were going to get the latest Yeezus Adidas sneakers the next morning.
I see. I don't consider that art. I just see that as just consumerism gone absolutely haywire.
I reckon if we listen back to this in a few years' time, we may feel differently about that.
I'll regret my words.
No, I might. I'm just saying that's my opinion. And you see people buying new stuff, and the stuff that's coming out is a lot more like bespoke design. There's like specialist limited edition stuff that's very kind of abstract and weird, and people collect them and don't really want to wear them. But it seems to me there's like a big tradition of things that are utilitarian that then become artistic. Painting being probably the first one, but
and you've hit on a really interesting point there, mate, because I think there is without a doubt a bias that, or maybe just a bias within me, that as soon as like someone is like using it on a daily basis, or it's providing that utility on a daily basis, other than just to be enjoyed or observed, or is just expressing itself through whatever medium it is, then for me it kind of it moves from the realm of art into something else. It's not to say that, as you say, like a computer game or a product can't be artistic in its creation. I just wouldn't consider it as art per se. I feel like art's the thing you put on the wall. Art's the thing that you listen to, or art's the thing you admire sitting on the table, or out the back in the garden, or something like that. As opposed to being the thing that you bought an overpriced pair of sneakers, and now you're wearing them around just to show that everyone that you're a fashionable person, or maybe showing some that you're a fashionable person, others thinking you look ridiculous, and then a third population who are completely oblivious to the fact.
Yeah, definitely. It's complicated. It helps if the person presenting it says it's art in the first place. Gives you the chance to buy into that idea. Not necessary, but perhaps helpful. I think if the other thing that seems to be a good indicator is if I say, these sneakers that I paid $600 for, limited edition Kanye West sneakers, if that makes the person on the other side feel very strongly, it's likely to end up being definitely more valuable in the future, and likely in hindsight be seen as art, because it elicits a reaction, and it elicits a strong reaction. So, and there seems to be like a proportional inverse thing with these crowds, and if you've got a strong negative opinion, someone else will likely have an equal opposite opinion to it.
Yeah, you haven't made it until you've got hate.
That's it. Haters, you got to have the haters.
Yeah, got to love the haters. And so I don't know, what's your take on sneakers? Like, are you a sneakerholic? Is that a thing?
No. I've got one pair of Adidas, and my problem is that I wear things till they're absolutely at the end. So currently I've got a pair of red Adidas that have holes in both soles. And coming into winter, I'm a little worried about my socks, so I've got to upgrade, unfortunately. But I'm doing it being dragged, kicking and screaming. So
Yeah, I'm the same, mate. Uh, if that pair of sneakers that I told you about, if it didn't have two holes poking out, and this is another reason, these like fabricy top sneakers, they are just fragile. They just fall apart. And so like, if I didn't have two holes poking out the end where my big toes are supposed to be covered in shoe, I would still have those same sneakers that I bought that long ago. But they just don't stand the test of time like the old ones used to, mate.
That's very funny. So let's. There's probably a reason for this. It's because we're on the art train this week.
Oh, what a segue into the show, mate.
All aboard.
Well, I think the topic of today's conversation fits very much in the regime of what you were just describing there. This, is it art? Is it not art? And if you haven't made it until you've got the haters. And I think today's topic, Jeff Koons, hits on that in a very powerful way. He is a man of much controversy, but I think just that by its nature kind of locks him into the sands of time, if you will. The fact that there is so much energy, regardless of positive or negative, it imprints you.
So you're going to hear, there's a disclaimer we've got to give up front. You're hearing two guys who know nothing about art, who are about to talk about art for an hour. So strap yourself in.
You locked into amateur hour.
So if you want to see us stumble our way through this one, please listen on or watch on. Tell us about Jeff.
Koons, he was, Jeff Koons, he was born in 1955, right? So what is it? Does that make him a baby boomer?
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
Probably
baby
right on
boomer.
the edge.
Right on the edge there. And he's an American. His mum was a seamstress and his dad an interior designer, a prominent interior designer in the city of New York. And I feel like his parents have a lot to say about the direction he ended up taking, because I would say that both of those, like, they're both in textiles / in design already. I think that has a big influence on the direction that Jeff probably ended up taking. It would have saw him exposed to lots of creative and artistic things at a young age. So, as a child, I found this just super interesting. He was going door to door selling gift wrapping paper and candy. So he was developing salesmanship at a very, very young age. And
interesting materials too.
Yeah, like gift wrapping paper and candy. They're very
sort of
very
like
weird,
the all American upbringing, isn't it? It's just a weird sort of, small town thing or something,
Yeah, it's like the Boy Scouts or the Girl Scouts thing that happens where they sell cookies or something like that, door to door.
Yeah.
I don't know if that happens in Oz, mate. I don't know if I've seen it.
Not anymore. So.
Yeah. Yeah, it's certainly not anymore. No. It's something of a bygone era.
Yeah.
He was into art, and he, even from a young age, and in his late teenage years, he was very much into Duchamp, Marcel Duchamp, and Salvador Dali, who are also my favorite artists for the little that I know about art.
That's cool. What is it about those two that kind of catches your eye?
It's surrealism. So these two are very much in that surrealist space, and I think they blur this line between like dream time, like a dreamlike feel that you get within art, and it's almost like in between dream and lucidity, and there's some sort of weird place that they both hit on in the works they produce. That
Well, the only work I know that Duchamp did is the toilet,
the urinal. Yeah,
where
he's got some.
where he plonked a urinal on a pedestal for an art show and said, "This is art," which feels a bit more like that sort of rebellious postmodern sort of feel that came really a lot later on. So he's very ahead of his time.
I think the mate, the key with that is it was put on its side.
So you couldn't use it in the show.
Exactly. So it had no utility.
This is like in the 1930s or something, though, wasn't it?
This is the thing. I don't know. It's all a place and time thing in this art space, or at least that's the way it seems to me. In that you see like some of this like abstract art, or the kind of late stage maybe abstract art where someone has like a bit of white, like half the canvas is white and half the canvas is blue or something, and it's like, and then people say, "Oh, I could have done that in primary school. This is an art type thing." But I think that's the point, is it's a statement at the time. And it's a statement coming from someone who, there's a famous quote from Pablo Picasso, is, "I spent 17 years learning how to paint like an adult and paint like a professional and paint exactly what was detailed. And then I spent the rest of my life learning how to paint like a kindergarten, kid, because there's some like essence, there's some like connection with humanity that gets struck upon. I think there's some of like I feel like abstract art for a reason has the name, because it's just abstracted up, or abstracted even down into the deeper layers. And
I guess when you start to look into it, it sort of becomes more. If you follow the history and of the modern art as it kind of has evolved, you can see that the blank canvases or what have you, of sort of that, even like I guess you call it abstract expressionism at that point, with like Pollock and his paintings, but then also it's kind of connected to that psychoanalyst kind of feel, where it's like it's like free expression, it's free association with the paint, it's just going everywhere or whatever, and he creates these incredible things. And then there's the ones where there's just like a few colours, but that's sort of the next iteration from sort of that cubism thing that Picasso was doing, right? Is that it's not about detailing the subject accurately. It's like it's expressing an emotion.
That's exactly it, mate. You've gone from, an exact portrayal of a person sitting in a portrait, to then little flares and things coming out from that person as you move more and more into like the surrealist, etc., or expressionist and surrealist space. And then eventually you get down the lower end, rungs of the core emotion, and you've just got a few blotches of color in certain ways that represent a particular emotion, or evoke a particular type of feeling within the viewer. And so I think there's power in that, and there's also power for being the one to do it and the one to make the statement of doing it at the time. It's ballsy, particularly someone that might have produced something excellent 5 years prior to that, and then they come out and present this, say these two boxes at the time would have just, it often is shocking, and it's often too early for the time at which it's released to be understood.
Very interesting.
So he was so into Duchamp and Dali that he caught wind that Dali had regular stays in New York City coming across from Spain or France or wherever he was residing for the rest of the year, and got in contact somehow with him, to which Dali actually responded and said, "Sure, I'd love to meet with you." I think he was about 18, 19 years at the time, Koons. And so they caught up for like a day in his hotel lobby, which is incredible. He started painting.
Cool.
It is cool, but like it's ballsy, mate. You know, to pen a letter to someone and say, "Hey, I want to come meet you." And Dali at the time, he was very famous. He was a star. So then he studied painting, studying through his studies, or just after he met Ed Pasch, which is he's another famous artist, and he became an assistant for him. And Pasch was a very kind of prominent influence on Koons's way he does things. You do see a lot of like similarity between their works. And he moved back to NY because he was born in NY, New York City, in 1977, and got a job at MoMA, Museum of Modern Art, and then decided he wanted to dye his hair red and cultivate the classic like Dali pencil moustache at that age. 1980s, he got or 1980, he got license to sell mutual funds.
Okay.
So a guy that's taken a path of, basically being totally immersed in art his entire childhood and his entire, early adult years, then moves, at the age of 25 into commodities brokering and joined the First Investors Corporation. He went into this so that he could fund his art.
Yeah.
He realized he wasn't making enough money working as an assistant at these museums, and he needed a way to make more money faster. And so he decided, what better way to do that than go to Wall Street?
Yeah. Well, it makes sense. And he, by all accounts, he's a very good salesman.
This is it. And so shortly, or not so shortly, but towards the end of that decade, his art that he started producing actually started gaining a little bit of prominence and a little bit of attention. And then shortly after, this is when he started setting up his initial like factory-like studio, if you will, where he has 30 assistants kind of doing, and he's the visionary or the direction for that art. He says, "I'm basically the idea person. I'm not physically involved in production. I don't have the necessary abilities, so I go to the top people."
Controversial. We'll talk about
and
that
now,
a bit.
Yeah, and now he has, somewhere at the order of 90 to 120 assistants in that little workshop, or not so little workshop, helping him out now. And he obviously had to develop some systems and things for the way that the art gets produced. So, like, you think about maybe not this as low in sophistication, but you think about those little drawings you did as like a kid in a book that had like color number 3 in green, color the number 5 in yellow, and you'll eventually end up with a beautiful picture of a flower. I think it's a very similar system that he's had to develop for passing on that information to his to all these assistants.
So why did we get to this point? He's sort of one of the most famous contemporary living artists now, isn't he? I tend to think so, and I think a lot of people would recognise at least one of his pieces. He's had a few really famous ones. The one I'm thinking here, mate, is the dog. Yeah.
The famous balloon dog.
Yeah. So I guess he's gone from nobody in the 80s to, last year he sold a 3-foot tall silver bunny for $91 million. And I guess we'll discuss whether that means this stuff's any good. and what that actually means for the validity of the art. But he's certainly, like, by a lot, I believe he's talked about as like a bit of a churning out work for billionaires, sold out, that there's not much behind it, and it's effectively a commerce thing. People are pissed off he doesn't make it himself. Others think his stuff's genius. I guess it's up to you, the viewer, to figure out what you think. But a good person to talk about nonetheless.
Yeah. So he's got some of his like famous works, mate. He's got the. Now, was this one of the early ones, the vacuum cleaners?
Yeah. So probably his earliest real proper display that he did was he put a bunch of new vacuum cleaners that he'd bought with his Wall Street money in these Perspex boxes, and had a bunch of fluorescent lights sort of shining on them. And it was called the New, and all these things were new, and they were arranged in different ways. And back then, even though it was probably after Warhol and Duchamp, this was quite strange. He also displayed all these blow-up toys, these really small ones at the time. I think they were actually blow-up toys and not, replicas, but nonetheless, that was his start. And it got some attention, but wasn't crazy sort of popular, I don't think.
Yeah, I think what it certainly did is it certainly had critics to begin with, but he had fans and he had critics, and it's kind of the tightrope that you have to walk, regardless of what it is. He effectively used his money that he had earned to buy these brand spanking new vacuum cleaners and seal them in time within these Perspex boxes. So make of it what you will. The other one, mate, one of your favourite pieces, the Equilibrium.
Yeah, this is what kind of got me into looking into this guy, because I saw this piece of art that he'd done where he basically had 3 Nike posters of these basketballers on the walls, and then he had these tanks that he'd filled with like water, but half of the water is sort of heavier than the top half of the water. It's some sort of like heavy water, you can get that apparently. And so when he put these basketballs in it, they look like they're just like floating, suspended in midair and like kind of caught in time. And then along with that, he had these cast iron lifeboats and aqualungs and things that were meant to sort of save you but wouldn't. And it was just like something about seeing this, I was just like, oh, that's really struck me, I can't really explain it. But I found myself thinking about the basketballs. I'd be like doing something else and I'd think about this art piece, and I was like, oh man, there's something in this. I'm really into this. And it's funny how something like that could actually affect you. I never thought it would.
I know what it is, mate. I know what struck you. You were just reminiscing on your days of hydraulic engineering and just wondering, how did he do this? The density
laminar
of water.
And turbulent flow. I mean, I guess I like the idea of this. I mean, he works a lot with these readymades, which are just everyday objects. There's something quite relatable about that, but it's more than just plonking it like some of his other ones where he just plonks it on a stand and goes, there you are, or whatever, and talks about it. It was quite magical the way that they was just suspended in air. And,
I was fascinated by it too, mate. And it was there's like when you see it, there's like this not mirage, but it's like a visual deception that's going on too. It looks 2D, but it's actually 3D, and there's all kinds of things happening. And I was I'm also fascinated by this one. I'm probably more fascinated by this one than some of his other pieces. Although let's get into them.
Yeah.
Because I want to talk about whether they are fascinating or not. So some other things that he's done is, you mentioned the inflatable objects. So there's like some palm trees, like quite literally it looks like something you buy from like a pool store, blow it up and rest it on like a mirror type thing, or a couple of mirrors at an angle. He's done a lot of stainless steel objects. There's the pieces banality, which, are the opposite of, I guess, something banal in some ways. And they're like these gold stainless steel statues. There's a Pink Panther one in there. Made in Heaven was basically like a pornographic suite with him as one of the main members. And, he's like showed these. They said he at the initial launch slideshow with all these art critics in there, it's, just him, quite literally in a pornographic scene. And everyone's just like, what?
Shock and awe. But there is sort of like a sexual element to a lot of these works where he'll pair something that's very much like innocent and almost something from your childhood or something, with some really tacky picture of a naked woman or a sculpture like that or something like that.
This mate is exactly the motives of Dali and Duchamp. Their entire works are like constructed around sexuality, and they have little, like the lobster within Dali, and many of his other like recurring creatures and recurring objects that appear are all sexual in nature. And I think you see this a lot is just simply because it is quite emotive. It is quite an emotive thing for our humanity to see that stuff.
Mm.
And whether you become like prudish as a result of it, or whether you become like enthralled in it because of it, it creates that dynamic of high emotion for people when they're looking at this type of work.
Yeah, there's something sinister in that stuff that he made. I think it felt like it was a dark side or something.
You're right. You are absolutely right.
That's how it felt to me. Not that kind of necessarily because you're displaying sex, it's a dark side, but it was just the way that he did it. It just, yeah.
I think that's
consistent. In your face.
I see that as consistent. Yeah, I see that as consistent too. It's almost like, again, Dali and Duchamp move into like these weird kind of fetish-like spaces, these weird darker realms of things that, almost like you shouldn't think about type stuff. And I agree that, Koons definitely has that. He has there was like a Michael Jackson one with a monkey, sitting with a monkey, and it was just a weird situation that was sitting there. Or there was like a big bear with a policeman, but the dynamic of the bear and the policeman was like I don't know. There was a weird something connection that you could see there.
But it was also dressed up as very innocent. So yeah, very strange.
Exactly.
And then he really hits the big time with his last couple of, I mean, really the giant balloon toys are amazing, but again, very controversial.
Yeah, I quite liked, so that's Celebration, the piece Celebration, where he did a bunch of like celebratory type things. And then the other was Antiquity, where he basically took Greek statues or Greek-like looking statues in this very like white canvased sculpture, and then put this, reflective stainless steel ball somewhere on them effectively. And that's quite, I quite like that. There's something powerful in that, in those, for me, mate.
Yeah, that one's quite the blue in it's very striking, and it's an interesting idea. I think a lot of this stuff you need to see it in person. I get the feeling to get the full effect because the scale of it's important. But very controversial career, and it's just so interesting. So there's a lot of themes that we can talk about here. And if you're listening along to this or watching, hit pause and Google the work. And have a look. And
you'll either come back with like an interest or you come back with disgust about the fact that we're talking about it. And then you found the right guy.
Yeah.
So ready-madeness, like, is it art?
Well, so this, I guess it depends and a lot of this stuff with him is like, it really does challenge you to think about, well, what is art? Is it the actual fact that you're putting your own hand to it, as we mentioned? Is it that it has to be an original creation? Or is it a feeling that the artist conveys to you? Or is it up to you to have the feeling, and once you have a feeling by looking at it, it is art, And that's pretty complex. And all his work, I think, challenges these ideas. It's on the edge of what you might consider art or not. So this kind of the urinal is the first Readymade by Duchamp, I believe, and all Koons' work could be considered as Readymades because they are objects that exist in real life already. I can't really think of one that maybe the sculptures aren't, but they all have the theme back to something that already exists in your life that you can identify. And certainly his earlier work where he encapsulated these vacuums and sealed them, and the basketballs. How does it make me feel? Well, I think for me, it allows me to relate to it a bit more. Certainly a lot more than some of the abstract art. It's like, I know what that is. You've got this instant predetermined reaction to these objects, but maybe it challenges you to think about them in a different way or in a different context, and confuses you. And so with the vacuum cleaners, he said that if any of them were to be turned on, the art would be worthless and destroyed. So for him, that piece was really about the perfection of the new or the exciting or capturing that moment. Maybe, I don't know what it could be, but it evokes kind of ideas of maybe not being alive, kind of stuck or something in purgatory to me. But then again, they're just vacuum cleaners in boxes, aren't they?
Well, and I think there's a key element to all of his, or maybe you could say across all of his art, is there's always like this dichotomy. There's always this like two opposing forces coming together. And what I mean by that is you've got reality and you've got kind of this, down the other end of the scale, complete non-reality. And so, for example, a vacuum cleaner, we don't know a vacuum cleaner as being this, preserved, perfectly clean object, basked in spotlight as a wonderful, exciting object. We see it as the dirty thing that gets stored in the cupboard in the house that, is absolutely turned on. It's total utility. The same with like even down the other end of the scale is like the reflective giant balloon dog. We don't associate a giant balloon dog as being a tough stainless steel structure that's going to stand forever. No, it's like a fleeting little fragile blown up thing that a clown makes for you.
And this dog is perfect. It looks exactly like a balloon dog. There is, it is perfect.
Except that it's made of stainless steel, and you couldn't. It's almost like you want to go up to it and like push it and squeeze it like a balloon dog, and then you would do that and realize that it's made of this solid stainless steel structure. And I think even antiquity, mate, where you've got these Greek statues, they don't look like stone, and I suspect that's the intention, is to not look like stone. They look like this perfectly like white recast of a statue. And I think that's the intent. Yeah, it's like it is. Yeah, and then coupling that with this, what we associate with Greek antiquity or Roman antiquity, or where these statues come from, with this just perfectly round modern ball. There's always this like paradox playing out between weirdness and the just the stark reality of what's happening. So for me, mate, I think that immediately like qualifies it as being art. And I think it takes a real talent to frame up something like that.
Yeah, I think
it's like,
I think me too. That's what I.
It's like I could put a vacuum in a box, in a Perspex box. Yeah, but the point is that you didn't. And the point is that you can't just do that, and you can't just do that now, because ready-madeness is kind of, it's the wave has progressed on, and it's now next. So
the other thing is that it's very bold to do that and then put yourself out there and be like that. Here's the art, It's right on the edge of as far as you could probably push it to still feel like it probably is, but you're just not. You get those conflicted emotions looking at it. Like there's a video of a whole lot of school kids looking at the basketballs on YouTube, and it's a really interesting video to watch because some of them have like an amazement reaction, like, oh my God, this thing's like really freaking, it's visually interesting, and it's sort of, they kind of immediately accept this is an artwork, Others just immediately dismiss it and go, oh, what's this, But they actually haven't taken the time to engage with it and decide it is an art. They've just dismissed it outright because they're probably in front of a camera and they don't want to be seen to be the fool, And then there's some really interesting things that some other teenagers have these reactions to it. One girl looks at it and says, the guy says, what do you think of this? And she goes, I want to smash it. I want to smash it, I want to break the glass, And it's very like visceral reaction to it. And he says, why? And she says, well, I sit around with my paintbrush and paint, and this guy's just put a bunch of basketballs in it. Why is he gets to be successful? But I suspect perhaps maybe that was the reason, but I don't know. Her first answer is just so, it comes from very deep inside your head, I think. And there's another guy.
Hit her close to home, mate. She's like, I've been fucking slaving away for all this time in my shed trying to paint something, and then this guy who's not an artist just puts some basketballs in water and he's an artist, But
I suspect that it was very confronting and she just rejected it. And then there's another guy who's like, oh, it's just these basketballs. And then he goes, oh, but actually it's they're kind of amazing how they're kind of hanging there in the water. And then his eyes start getting bigger and he's having like this moment where he's like, holy shit, it's more than just a basketball. What is life?
The director's like, son, you're still on camera.
Yeah. You can see him starting to question everything in the moment. And it's just, so, I think that pretty much means it qualifies. But a lot of it's the setting, It's in an art gallery. Someone's told you this is a famous piece of art, So that's got to play a role as well, right?
Well, that's it. That's it, mate. It's all about, you've got to have the backers, and not the backers in people who like it and don't like it. You've got to have the the institutional backers, or you've got to be just so, cutting through all of the noise. And I think maybe an example of this could be like Banksy type esque stuff, where you're just so loud in what you do that it can't help but be noticed. So that's probably the exception to needing backers, or maybe some sort of like internet proliferated art that you might find. So this guy, without a doubt, is a salesman.
Yeah.
But I find it weird that he's a salesman, because he's a weird guy. Do you find that?
He's a really creepy guy. Very strange. Seems disingenuous. I found him unsettling in some way. Yeah.
I find him, that is exactly the word, I think, disingenuous. He sounds disingenuous because he sounds like someone that's putting on a voice. But I think you realize when you look back at his early videos, he talks exactly the same, like when he was like in his early 20s. And that to me, mate, I was like, oh, there's more to this guy than just being like a disingenuous salesman.
Yeah, let me put it this way. The work, it feels more human through the work than when he's speaking. Like there's more depth to the complexity of like those different things that we talked about earlier, about the dark side, the light side, this kind of thing, and all these kind of references back to his 60s upbringing or whatever. Much deeper than when he's actually talking about it, I reckon.
I tend to think so. And when you see him in the documentary, like trying to explain to the kids, and he's, these kids they're probably in, this particular group was probably in like grade 1, grade 2 or something like that at school. And he's starting to talk about, this water density is this and this. And you're like, mate, like kids are smart, but you're using like decimal numbers here. You're talking like about densities of materials. This isn't going to click well. And just the language he was using, it was like, this isn't going to connect. Just keep it simpler.
Mm. So a quote from him is, art is something that happens inside us. We look at things in the world and we become excited by them. We understand our own possibilities of becoming, and that's what art is. So that's why he makes the Readymades, I think. So he's definitely of the opinion that it's your reaction that makes it art. And an artist can bring that out of you. That's the art. If it's a dark room and you're not watching, you can't see anything, then, and then you turn the light on, the art's there, and you feel something, bang.
I think it's also, and like, I think there is art that gets over a certain, threshold of skill level. And then once you're over that threshold of skill level, there's a lot of people playing this space, by the way. And then so it takes something else to separate beyond. And so I think that's where you start to like hit on some of these other weird elements, always coupled with a salesmanship. There's always a backer in there. And, case in point, you mentioned like Pollock before. Pollock was backed by like Peggy Guggenheim. And if it wasn't for her, he probably would have gone into the abyss of the, just the never started type thing.
You need a sponsor or a what do they call it? In Renaissance, it was a
muse, a sponsor. The combination of things, I think, for them. But without a doubt, I think this guy,
a patron, that's it,
is also an incredible salesman himself.
Yes,
which I don't know. I feel like you see less of that in the portrayal of at least some of the art history that I've seen about some of these artists who are just lost in their own worlds of producing the art and don't. They need someone else to help them out with the actual selling. So
true, but maybe it's like more around like there needs to be like a bit of mystery and personality around the artist to really blow them up. So being some sort of weird recluse that cuts your ear off, that doesn't hurt.
I thought you weren't going to mention him at all this episode, mate. We were doing so well.
I know. And then, or if you're, Andy Warhol's probably the person who amped this up the most, He created a whole personality around his art that, was probably him on steroids and maybe wasn't even him, arguably. So,
well, David Bowie's very similar in that regard, mate. You don't know the David Bowie.
Yeah.
It's which is incredible, and I think you're right. There's a definite need for just some sort of wild personality for us to grasp onto. And I feel like you see this as well in celebrity status. Like it's not the everyday Joe that's the standout celebrity. There's a quirk. There's always a weird bunch of quirks that are needed to make people stand out from the crowd.
Yeah, exactly.
Which takes a lot of courage too, because I think a lot of people have these quirks, and a lot of us are and speak for myself, like you're almost like afraid to show some of those quirks to the world, and it takes a real toughness to do that.
I definitely relate to that, and I think like it's that question, like, have you ever done something as bold as putting a whole bunch of vacuum cleaners in some cases and say, this is my expression of my emotions, my art, or my training, it's my profession. Now come judge me, knowing what the reaction's going to be. I haven't done anything that bold.
And I think, mate, the putting it up for the public scrutiny is it's a bold move. Although we do live in the world of like social media and people posting their entire lives on social media, but I don't think it's the same thing.
But they're not telling you who they are; they're showing you their mask.
Well, that's also true. Yeah.
So I feel like maybe he was doing that, but probably doesn't feel like it to me. He was trying.
And this is the thing
something.
and I think the real big point here to make, mate, is that just because he's not producing. Oh, well, we can get onto this in a tick, but just because he's not necessarily producing that art doesn't mean that it's not his art either.
I agree with that. I think people get real fired up about this. Christy and I were arguing about it the other night. And I think it doesn't matter as long as he's the one directing and had the idea in the first place. That's fine. I don't think there's too much wrong, and I don't think he would have been able to create what he did. And there's a long history of people having teams of artists pump out work right back to the Renaissance. So.
Absolutely, mate. Yeah, and probably longer than that. We just, I think the records maybe just get a little bit fuzzy, or the employment paperwork wasn't quite as robust.
So, I guess that kind of rolls into the commerce of art. So what effect does like the fact that he's popular have on the work and your interpretation of the work?
Yeah. This is the thing, mate, is you've just like, and you hit on it before in the rendition of the kids that were looking at it. And kids are just, little versions of or younger versions of us, of adults, you know, and they just have like an unfiltered, in some ways, an unfiltered version of what we have as being a little bit of a mask in front of us from time to time. And you know, I feel like there's always certain people in a dynamic. You've got the people who will just literally just follow along with whatever the consensus is. You've got the people that will always oppose the consensus just because they want to oppose the consensus. And you've got the people that will actually give their genuine perspective on a situation. And I feel like the reception in art is no different. It's like you've got all the different types of people in the foray. And, you know, there's no doubt that certain art has certain impacts on people because of it hits on something. It captures something for them. It has some relation to the history and your experience. You know, if I went back 10 years ago, mate, there's no way I would see myself as ever being interested in abstract art. I just considered it ridiculous. You know, that someone can do that and that's art. But now, whether that's just like more life experience under the belt, I feel like it starts to resonate. Or maybe it's just more exposure to art over the years, not necessarily the life experience under the belt. And I think the other thing to emphasize here, mate, is there is taste. There is individual taste that comes into the picture, which is probably also influenced by that, you know, individual experience, individual lived experience.
Yeah, it's interesting because this question's very multifaceted. Like, you've got the fact that, okay, if something's popular, it means that it's affected more people, probably by definition, you know, like more people have become interested in it. That probably then maybe that means that it does say something to a lot of people, therefore it is good. Or is it just that it got a bit of a snowball effect going and its popularity doesn't actually say too much about how good it is? But it definitely affects, if you're the person coming to it and you know it's by a famous artist that's really popular, people are telling you it's a masterpiece. You're going to look at it and go with a more discerning eye than if you pass it in a $2 shop. And I think that's true of Jeff, definitely, for me. But it might also help you see something in it that you wouldn't otherwise pay attention to. So maybe it's a good thing. And then there's sort of like the money aspect, you know. If you can sell a little rabbit for $91 million, that's got something to do with probably the bubble of art, or, you know, there's market forces at play there, and that adds another layer. But it certainly creates headline, and it's very sensational, I guess. Yeah.
Well, with the market forces at play, like I think there is an element of market forces, but I think there's another big element of just someone might be just taken away. Like, have you been taken away by just a particular piece of art? And if that happens and you had the means to buy it, you would just pay whatever. You wouldn't care. You'd just keep bidding on this particular item if you were that way inclined. And I think it speaks to like the disproportion of wealth as well. And, you know, even just to be in the space of buying art is, you know, almost just gives an air of wealth there. And I think
you can want to possess something for many reasons, not necessarily that it's touched you because of art. You might just want to sell it 5 years later. It might be a pure commodity to you.
That's exactly right, mate. And so this is where the market forces come into play. In the market, they go, hey, we are going to buy art not because we care about the art, but because we care about the appreciation on the art in years to come. And so it's an investment. Wine is in a similar space. There's people that just buy wine just to flip wine. Again, it's all this very almost. This is the thing. Is it more subjective than the stock market? Probably, but how much so? Probably not as much as you think.
For the everyday person. The other thing is, like, it seems to be, I think you might have mentioned this earlier episode, it's a snapshot of time too. So if you're seeing something that is, people say, is brilliant, it doesn't touch you that much because it was very influential at the time and it was on the edge and it pushed to the edge. But now it's just normal, Like I think a lot of people have gone and seen the Mona Lisa and just been like, whatever. I was a bit like that. It's like, yeah, okay. Not much in this. But at the time, that was a real statement, right? So it's
always a controversial one, particularly the big famous pieces. But I think when you do
music's a bit like that as well.
Yeah, well, music's a very interesting one because music evolves at a very fast pace. Particularly of late, we've just forked off into so many different directions in the musical realms, and with the advent of electronic music and stuff, it's just going into so many different directions. So it can be, I don't know how we're going to look back as what is the music of the 2020s. What is the representation of that? Like, we can go back to the Baroque period and we are listening to Baroque music. We can go back to the 1920s, 1930s, starting, and then getting into like bebop and then early jazz and stuff. And that's very associated with that time. Whereas where we are now, it's become a lot more blurry, at least for me. I don't know, maybe that's because I'm stuck in the world of electronic and a lot of synthesized music, that there's a lot of different things, completely different things happening in that space.
Yeah, it's very complex. The art of music is not something I quite have my head around yet. But I know what I like, though. But yeah, it's a similar idea. I mean, music's definitely artistic, but like sometimes knowing a lot about something helps you understand the art of what it is too. Like, watching Mark Waugh hit a cut shot comes close to art, but you need to know something about cricket to have appreciated that. Otherwise, it's just a go with a stick, isn't it?
Well, this is. There's a recent series. I've recalled. So, I think it's called, like, think of it as a city, or it's a city, or it's something by Martin Scorsese on Netflix.
With that lady, that
Fran.
I haven't
Lebowitz.
watched that yet. I should watch it.
Yeah, it's great. It's excellent series, right? And she is arguing with a TV presenter about Michael Jordan and whether Michael Jordan was artistic or not. And so, like, the TV presenter was very biased sports, and she is she's anti-sports, like, and they are having this just deep debate live on air about whether Jordan is art or not. And she's saying, no, it's absolutely not art. And then, it's just this great discussion. But there's an element of that in itself that kind of qualifies it as being artistic. it's like the move is artistic in because you're playing in this space that, because it's at such a like depth that no one else can see, or other people a few levels up can see, but they can nowhere near do. And so that's what creates it as being this this artistic style. There's a
less abstract. It's probably more closer to the more realist painters.
Well, maybe, right? Because the realist painters, whilst they're creating an exact representation, and let's say you're picturing like a face, and there's a certain element of the face, like maybe the point of the chin or something that evokes a particular emotion in you. The abstract artist might take a portion of that chin and then kind of abstract out the emotion from that, I'm saying, the chin there, and then use their artistic flair to kind of make it really sing. And that, arguably that's just as difficult to do as, an exact replication of reality, to do it right and to do it well.
Interesting. Because I guess you could also argue that Jordan was doing stuff that no one else could. So,
yes,
and making you see things in a new way and eliciting some new feelings. There is a form of Does it? I mean, we're entering a whole new realm of discussion here, but does it have to be elegant to be sort of artistic in a sporting sense? I don't know.
Well, I think there's
another day.
there's a book called The Art of Learning, I think, by Josh Waitzkin. Do you know Josh Waitzkin?
Yeah.
He was a he was like the next Bobby Fischer. I think he's the In Search of Bobby Fischer in the movie. I think he is that kid who's playing the role. So he's a chess great, and he talks about learning, and once you get into it, he describes that once you get into a particular depth of expertise and understanding, that you're playing in this other realm of stuff that's happening, and so the moves on a chessboard can become quite artistic in that sense. It's like a feel of the chessboard, as opposed to, like, for me, I'm just trying to work out what's like the next move that I can do. Whereas they are thinking about the dynamics and the feel of all the different things happening on the board.
Yeah, I mean, it's my opinion that anything done to enough to a proper extent, you can get good enough to make it artistic, I think.
I very much agree with that. Right?
So let me ask you to kind of, before we do the closing quote, is Jeff Koons' works the work of a genius? Provocative question.
Ooh. Look, I'm just going to flat out say no. I look at the pieces, and there are okay. Let me frame it up this way, and maybe this is just a matter of taste again, right? Because I'm not huge into his art, but I recognize it as being, good art. It's just not necessarily for me. Even though it's quite interesting of the having similar role models or people of influence. So there has been certain like art from previous eras that resonates so much when you look at them, when you see them, when you see what has happened and what's been done within the. Even though you haven't even lived at the context of that time, but you can get a sense of what the context of the time was and still feel the emotion through that particular piece. Whereas I, have lived through the context of the time of Jeff's pieces. And yes, some of them do resonate, but I just haven't got the same resonating feel to. I'd say he's an excellent artist. I wouldn't call him like, a genius for the ages. But who knows? What do I know?
Good answer.
What about you?
Damn it, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me this.
Oh, no.
I think the answer for me is the word genius is a bit strong.
That's what
But he's the first bit of modern art I've looked at and had a strong emotional reaction to. So in that sense, I would have to say, if you forced me to answer, I'm closer to yes than no. Mainly just for that reason, that it evoked a strong reaction and that it's uncomfortable even kind of saying that I think that he might be, because it's so divisive, the stuff he does, and I feel that I don't necessarily like him, or I find him uncomfortable, and it seems to me like he's almost certainly sold out at this point. But those first two exhibitions, I got to hand it to him. I think it's a yes from me.
I'm always fascinated by this sold out discussion, because it's you hear people like abusing an artist because they become a sellout, and it's like, well, if you had the platform and you had the ability to sell your work, wouldn't you sell it?
All artists want to be rich. It's like, come on. Like, it's true.
It is true. And
I guess
it seems to me any artist, and any artist that is calling out other artists for being a sellout, I just feel like, well, I think it's just envy that you haven't necessarily made it.
Completely agree. I think maybe it's like it felt to me there was a lot of feeling in those early ones. Whether there's a loss of edge or it's too much repeating the similar style now over and over again, or something like that makes me feel like maybe it doesn't have the edge it used to. But
this is also his motive, mate. Like that's one of his key motives are those core elements that are a consistency through his art, like the stainless steel reflectiveness of things, etc. is a core element. And I think his best work is yet to come. If he kind of doubles down on that which he's trying, or he has the potential to, I think, to have his best work yet to come.
I'd like to see him take a strong right-hand turn to something we're totally not expecting, and to find that uncomfortable feeling again. That's where it felt the most challenging. That's where it feels a bit safe, right. This stuff.
Yes. And I think, mate, the other thing is I want to go visit some of this art as well. I haven't seen it in person, and as you said it, I think earlier at the start of the episode, it is so different seeing in the physical to what can be captured via film or photo or whatever. So big one for me.
Well, that could add that to our America trip, I think. Sounds good. You want to give us the closing quote?
Oh, what better way than this quote coming from a master salesman himself? If you don't manipulate or seduce, you'll become disempowered and not be able to help people in life. Dum, dum, dum.
Thanks, mate.
Cheers.